What if the foods you've been calling Italian your whole life were never Italian at all? What if the dish you ordered last Friday night, the one that felt like a warm hug from the Mediterranean, was actually born thousands of miles away, in a culture that Italy had nothing to do with? And what if everything you thought you knew about the world's most beloved cuisine was built on a beautiful, delicious lie? The truth is, Italian food, as we know it, is one of history's greatest reinventions. And here on Where Food Began, we're about to prove it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because nothing is ever what it seems. Food number 1, tomatoes. Today, it's almost impossible to imagine Italian cooking without tomatoes. The rich, slow-simmered sauces, the deep red pools of sugo clinging to fresh pasta, the soul of an entire cuisine built on that bright, acidic sweetness. But tomatoes are not European. Not even close. The tomato is native to the western slopes of the Andes in South America, modern-day Peru and Ecuador, where indigenous peoples had been cultivating it for thousands of years before a single Italian had ever laid eyes on one. Spanish conquistadors brought it back to Europe sometime around 1519, after encountering it in the Aztec markets of Tenochtitlan, where it was called tomatal. It arrived in Italy decades later, and even then, Italians were deeply suspicious of it. For nearly 2 centuries, the tomato was grown purely as an ornamental plant, something pretty to look at, not to eat, because botanists believed it was poisonous. It wasn't until the late 1700s, particularly among the poor in Naples, that Italians finally put the tomato on food, and that changed everything. The tomato didn't just become an ingredient, it became an identity. Today, Italy produces over 6 million tons of tomatoes per year, and the world calls it Italian. But it took a 10,000-mile journey and 2 centuries of suspicion before Italy even took a single bite. Food number 2, pasta. Silky, golden, endlessly versatile. Pasta is the very heartbeat of Italian culture. The food that Italians have claimed as their own with more passion and pride than perhaps anything else on earth. But pasta did not begin in Italy. The most credible historical evidence points to China, where noodles made from millet have been traced back over 4,000 years. A discovery confirmed in 2005 when archaeologists unearthed a sealed bowl of ancient noodles at the Loggia site along the Yellow River. The popular legend that Marco Polo brought pasta back from China in 1295 is largely disputed by historians. But what isn't disputed is that Arab traders introduced dried pasta to Sicily as early as the 12th century, a full century before Marco Polo ever set sail. A Sicilian document from 1154, written by the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi, specifically describes a pasta-like food being produced in Palermo and exported across the Mediterranean. Here's the part that stops people cold. Italy was importing pasta before it was making it. What Italy did was take a practical ancient food technology and transform it into something transcendent, shaping it, saucing it, and weaving it so deeply into daily life that the world forgot it ever came from anywhere else. That's not theft, that's genius. Food number 3, pizza. Flat, crisp at the edges, soft at the center, topped with that slow-cooked tomato sauce and bubbling mozzarella. Pizza is the most recognized food on the planet, and its Italian identity feels absolutely unquestionable. Except the foundation of pizza, flatbread baked with toppings, is ancient, and it belongs to almost everyone before it belonged to Italy. Persian soldiers under King Darius I, around 500 BCE, were recorded baking flatbreads on their shields over open fire, topping them with cheese and dates in the field. The ancient Greeks who colonized southern Italy, a region they called Magna Graecia, brought with them a dish called plakis, a flatbread seasoned with oils, herbs, and onions. Even the word pizza itself may derive from the Lombardic word bizzo, meaning bite, carried into southern Italy by Germanic invaders in the 6th century. Naples eventually claimed it, refined it, and in 1889, a pizzaiolo named Raffaele Esposito made the iconic margherita for Queen Margherita of Savoy. And that moment crystallized pizza as Neapolitan forever. But here is what makes it extraordinary. Every civilization that ever gathered around a fire eventually invented some version of flatbread with toppings. Pizza isn't uniquely Italian, it's universally human. Naples just told a story better than anyone else. Food number 4. Gelato. Cold, dense, impossibly smooth. Gelato feels like the most Italian experience a human being can have. Eaten from a small paper cup on a cobblestone street while the afternoon sun melts everything around you. But the art of frozen desserts didn't begin in Italy. It began in the imperial courts of Tang Dynasty China. As far back as 618 CE, Chinese emperors were consuming frozen buffalo milk mixed with ice. A luxury so prized it required armies of servants to harvest ice from frozen mountains and transport it before it melted. Arab traders carried the concept westward, evolving it into sharbat, the chilled sweetened drinks that would eventually become sorbet. It was the Moorish influence on Sicily that first introduced frozen sweet preparations to Italian soil. Then, in the 16th century, a Florentine architect and artist named Bernardo Buontalenti is widely credited with creating the first recognizable gelato, a chilled custard of milk, egg, honey, and sweet wine, for the Medici court in 1565. Here is the detail that rewrites the story entirely. Buontalenti wasn't inventing something new. He was refining something ancient that had traveled from China to Arabia to Sicily before landing in his hands. Gelato is the taste of a 1,400-year journey, compressed into a single, perfect, cold spoonful. Food number 5, espresso. Dark, bitter, intensely fragrant. A tiny cup of espresso is the daily ritual of millions of Italians. The non-negotiable punctuation mark of every morning, every meal, and every conversation worth having. But coffee itself has nothing to do with Italy. It was born in the highlands of Ethiopia. According to the most widely documented origin story, a goat herder named Kaldi in the Kaffa region of Ethiopia first noticed his goats behaving with unusual energy after eating berries from a particular tree, sometime around 850 CE. Word spread, monks began brewing the berries into a drink to stay awake during long evening prayers. And from Ethiopia, coffee traveled to Yemen, where Sufi monasteries in the city of Mocha were drinking brewed coffee as early as the 15th century. Arab traders carried it across the Ottoman Empire, and coffee houses, called kahve khane, became the intellectual and social centers of cities like Constantinople and Cairo long before a single Italian espresso machine existed. Coffee arrived in Venice around 1600, brought by Levantine merchants. The detail that most people never hear: Italy didn't even develop the espresso machine until 1901, when Luigi Bezzera of Milan patented a pressurized brewing device to speed up coffee service for his factory workers. Italy didn't discover coffee, Italy just perfected the speed at which you drink it. Food number 6. Tiramisu. Creamy, cloud-like layers of mascarpone and espresso-soaked ladyfingers dusted with dark cocoa. Tiramisu feels ancient, timeless, like something passed down through generations of Italian grandmothers stretching back centuries. It was invented in 1969. The most credible and legally contested origin story places the creation of tiramisu at Le Becherie restaurant in Treviso, a small city in the Veneto region of northeastern Italy, where pastry chef Roberto Linguinotto created it, reportedly by accident, while making a traditional zabaglione cream and accidentally dropping mascarpone cheese into the mixture. The dish was refined alongside restaurateur Alba Campeol, who is often called the mother of tiramisu, and it appeared on the Le Becherie menu for the first time in December 1969. But here's where the story fractures. A chef named Carmen Antonio Iannacone claimed for years that he invented tiramisu in the 1960s in the city of Treviso as well. And a separate claim emerged from the Friuli Venezia Giulia region, attributing an earlier version to a different kitchen entirely. The ingredient that makes tiramisu possible, mascarpone cheese, itself originates from the Lombardy region, but cocoa powder came from Mesoamerica, and the concept of layered cream desserts has roots in French and English culinary tradition. Tiramisu is barely 57 years old, built from ingredients borrowed from 4 different cultures, and the world already calls it a classic. Food number 7, cappuccino. Warm, velvety, topped with a perfect dome of steamed milk foam. The cappuccino is the most elegant expression of Italian coffee culture. a drink so refined and specific that Italians will genuinely judge you for ordering one after noon. But the cappuccino was not born in an Italian cafe. Its name and its soul came from Vienna. In the early 18th century, after the Ottoman siege of Vienna failed in 1683, the retreating Turkish army left behind enormous sacks of coffee beans. A Polish military officer named Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki is credited with opening one of Vienna's first coffee houses and refining the bitter Turkish coffee by adding milk and honey, creating a lighter, creamier drink that Viennese cafe culture would perfect over the following century. This drink became known as the Cappuccino, named after the brown robes of the Capuchin friars, whose distinctive shade of warm brown perfectly matched the color of the coffee and milk mixture. Italian immigrants and cafe owners adopted the concept, renamed it Cappuccino, and the pressurized espresso machines of 20th century Italy gave it the silky microfoam texture we know today. The detail that reframes everything, the color of a cappuccino, is literally named after a monk's robe, and the drink itself was born from the spoils of a failed military siege. Every morning ritual has a war story behind it. Food number 8, Focaccia. Golden, dimpled, fragrant with olive oil and sea salt. Focaccia is the bread that Italy wears like a badge of honor. The ancient flatbread of Liguria that has been feeding people along the Italian Riviera for what feels like forever. But Focaccia's DNA stretches back far beyond Italy, to the ancient civilizations of the Middle East and North Africa. The Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and ancient Greeks were all baking variations of thick, oiled flatbread directly in the coals of a fire thousands of years before the Roman Empire existed. The Romans had their own version called panis focatius, literally hearth bread, derived from the Latin word focus, meaning fireplace, and they spread it across every territory they conquered, from North Africa to Britain. But the specific technique of pressing dimples into the dough with fingertips and flooding them with olive oil before baking, the gesture that defines focaccia as we know it, is believed by food historians to have strong roots in ancient Phoenician baking traditions carried into the Western Mediterranean. The Ligurian port city of Genoa eventually became its spiritual home, developing the fugassa, a version so tied to local identity that Genoese bakers reportedly eat it for breakfast, dipped directly into their morning cappuccino. Focaccia is one of humanity's oldest recipes, a simple act of pressing oil into dough that has survived every empire, every invasion, and every century without ever needing to change. Some things are just perfect from the beginning. Food number 9, Biscotti. Twice baked, bone dry, and built to survive, Biscotti are the crisp, golden bars of almond-studded cookie that Italians dunk into Vinsanto wine with an almost ceremonial patience. A food that feels deeply and specifically Tuscan in its no-nonsense practicality. But the technique of twice baking bread to extend its life was not an Italian invention. It was a military survival strategy that predates Italy by over 1,000 years. Roman legions marching across Europe and North Africa carried a twice-baked bread called panis biscoctus, literally, bread cooked twice. Because the double baking process removed almost all moisture, allowing the bread to remain edible for months without refrigeration. This was battlefield food, survival food, the ancient equivalent of a protein bar. The same technique was used by Arab bakers across North Africa and the Middle East, and by the time the medieval period arrived, twice-baked provisions were standard across dozens of cultures. The version we recognize today, sweetened, studded with almonds, and associated with Prato and Tuscany, was formalized by a 19th century baker named Antonio Mattei, whose recipe from around 1858 became the benchmark for what we now call cantucci or biscotti di Prato. Here is the quietly extraordinary truth. One of Italy's most beloved cookies began not in a bakery, but in a military kitchen designed to keep soldiers alive on a months-long march. Survival, it turns out, is the mother of all recipes. Food number 10, ricotta. Soft, pillowy, and impossibly mild. Ricotta is the gentle white heart of Italian cooking, folded into cannoli, layered into lasagna, spooned onto warm bread with a drizzle of honey. A cheese so woven into Italian life that removing it would feel like removing something essential from the culture itself. But ricotta is not uniquely Italian, and the technique that creates it is at least 3,000 years old, documented across civilizations that never once looked toward the Italian peninsula for inspiration. The process of making ricotta, heating whey left over from cheese making and watching the remaining proteins rise and coagulate into soft white curds, was practiced in ancient Mesopotamia, documented in Bronze Age Mediterranean cultures, and almost certainly arrived in Sicily and southern Italy through Arab and North African cheese-making traditions during the 9th and 10th century Arab rule of Sicily. An ancient clay tablet unearthed in Mesopotamia, dated to approximately 1200 BCE, describes a process of heating milk solids that food historians believe closely mirrors modern ricotta production. The word ricotta itself simply means recooked in Italian, a name so honest and functional that it barely tries to claim ownership. What strikes you when you sit with this history is the quiet humility of that name. Recooked. Italy didn't pretend to invent it. Italy just made it sing. And perhaps that is the most Italian thing of all. Taking something ancient, something borrowed, something that traveled across deserts and seas and centuries, and transforming it into something that feels like home. 10 foods, 10 stories, 10 journeys that crossed continents, survived empires, and traveled thousands of miles before they ever touched Italian soil. What Italy gave the world wasn't invention, it was transformation. The extraordinary, almost alchemical ability to take ingredients and ideas from every corner of the globe and make them feel like they were always meant to be together. That is the real secret of Italian food. And now you know it. If this changed the way you see your dinner plate, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe to Where Food Began so you never miss a story like this one. And tell us in the comments which of these 10 surprised you the most, because we have a feeling the tomato is going to start some argument.